Austin O'Connor looked up from his comic book and stared out the car window. They had been driving for hours, but all he had seen was hills and grass, more hills and more grass. This time he noticed a few trees, and then his father turned into the dirt road. Austin immediately unbuckled his seat belt. Mrs. O'Connor glanced over her shoulder from her front seat. "Keep your seatbelt on," she told Austin. I know, we're not on the main highway anymore, but driving is still dangerous." Austin thought his mother worried too much. "And remember," said Mrs. O'Connor, not taking his eyes off the road, "Grandma gets very lonely away out here." "She hadn't seen you since you were a baby," added his mother, smiling. During the long drive, Austin had realized he couldn't remember actually seeing his grandmother, only pictures of her. He didn't have a computer and only used an old television landline phone. In fact, he wondered why they were visiting her now. After all his time, his parents didn't say anything about a birthday. He was there a special reason for driving all the way out in the country. "Yes, she's quite lonely," his father said. "And sometimes lonely people do different things." "What do you mean, different things?" asked Austin. "Oh, George, really?" said Mrs. O'Connor. "It's true," said Mr. O'Connor when he glanced at Austin in the rearview mirror. "Your grandma has hobbies to pass the time." "Everyone has hobbies," said Mrs. O'Connor. "All I'm saying is if Grandma seems a little different," continued Austin's father, "just remember that she doesn't get a chance to see people, real people, that is." The car made another turn in the winding road. Austin saw an enormous old farmhouse, surrounded by birch trees and the wild green lawn. His father pulled the car to a stop in front of the house. Austin and his parents climbed out of their car. His mother leaned and grabbed a large tote bag that had been sitting by her feet, and it looked heavy. "I can carry that," said Austin. "No," his mother said sharply, pulling the bag to her chest. She put on a quick smile. "It's fine, dear. I can manage myself but thanks for the offer, Ing." An old woman greeted them from the front porch. Austin waved back. "Hi, Grandma," he said. He walked up the front wooden steps and found himself in a soft, warm embrace. Oh my, you've grown so much," said the old woman, and her tiny, wrinkled face close to Austin. "How are you, Mom?" said Mrs. O'Connor. "You've done such a good job raising your boy," she replied. I can tell. Just look at him." Austin was looking at the wide lawn. He couldn't see the main road, hidden a mile away behind the wall of trees. Sure is quiet here," said Austin. "And so much to do," said Grandma. "My family keeps me so busy, and my knitting, of course." "Family?" said Austin. "But I thought you lived all alone out here." Austin's mother gave him a shushing look, but it was too late. Grandma was opening the front door and waving Austin inside. "Before we have lunch on the porch," she said, "you must come in and say hello." Austin's eyes took a moment to adjust from the bright sunshine outside. He stood in a large dim room that was crammed with the forest furniture, chairs, tables, cabinets, ottomans, and sofas. At first, Austin thought everything was covered in blankets and pillows. Then he realized they were people knitted from yarn. Some yarn people sat on chairs, smaller figures sat in their laps. A family of dolls was squeezed together on the sofa. And other dolls sat at the table with a cup of coffee in front of them. A couple of yarn kittens perched on windowsills. Did he make all of these? Austin asked. Grandma smiled. Of course, dear. That's Grandma's job. Austin crept over to a boy-shaped figure yarn sitting on the low stool. He figured it was the same size he was. Realistic-looking yarn ears were sewn in other sides of the head. Austin put out his hand and touched it. I see you're making a friend, said Grandma. Austin pulled his hand away and the yarn ear twitched. Slowly, the yarn boy turned its arm, reached towards Austin. Austin yelled and backed away when he noticed that several of the bigger yarn figures were also turning and looking at him. A doll at one of the tables knocked over a coffee cup. He thought he heard a gasp from one of the knitted mouths. Well, weren't you gonna say hello to your cousins? Said Grandma. After all, this is a family reunion. Austin screamed and ran out the front door. He raced across the porch and down the wooden stairs. He didn't see the loose nail sticking up from one of the steps. Austin, his mother shouted. Faster and faster the boy ran. He had to get away. Something wasn't right. How could the dolls move like that? And what did Grandma mean when she said they were his cousins? Austin kept running. He couldn't stop until he reached the main road. Suddenly, he felt the ground. He fell to the ground. He looked down and saw below him shorts. His left leg was missing. In its place was a long, flesh-colored strand of yarn, winding all the way back to the front porch. And two loose nails had caught against Austin's foot. Austin, he heard an old woman's voice. She was walking across the grass, winding up the string of yarn into a ball. She went. Dear, she said, you'll have to stay with me for a while. I can't have you go home looking like that. The old woman looked off into the clouds and her thoughts far away. I can remember when I first made you for your mother. The poor dear couldn't have children, so I helped out. I love knitting, and you made her so happy. Then she turned and glanced back to her distant house. It's a good thing your mother brought extra yarn with her, she said. You need to grow a little more before school starts again. We want you to have just as tall as the other boys. The loose nails.